The person living next door. You probably hear their TV through the walls or smell whatever they're cooking for dinner. You might even trade a polite nod when you check the mail. It's all part of the deal. But what happens when that thin wall separating your lives is the only thing holding back an absolute nightmare? These 5 true stories start with the kind of simple annoyances everyone in an apartment deals with, but they quickly spiral into terrifying accounts of obsession, violence, and the chilling discovery that the biggest threat you'll ever face might just be on the other side of your door. Section 1. The music complaint. For Chloe, scoring her first solo apartment was a dream come true. It was a small 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of an old pre-war building, complete with high ceilings and a pretty decent view. Sure, it was old. The floors creaked and the pipes groaned, but it was all hers, her own little sanctuary. And for the first 2 weeks, it was perfect. She loved the quiet, the freedom, the simple joy of not having to tiptoe around roommates. Then, the music started. It began on a Tuesday night, a deep, thumping bass that seemed to vibrate right up through the floor and into her bones. It was coming from apartment 2B, directly below her. At first, Chloe just tried to ignore it. Hey, people have to live, right? A little noise is expected. She put on her own music, then switched to headphones, figuring it would die down at a reasonable hour. It didn't. At midnight, the bass was still pounding. By 1 a.m., it actually felt like it was getting louder. Finally, close to 2 a.m. and facing an early start at work, she padded downstairs in her slippers. She stood outside 2B, her heart thumping almost as hard as the music. Over the beat, she could hear people shouting and laughing. A full-blown party on a Tuesday. She knocked once, then twice. The music dropped a little, and the door creaked open to reveal a tall, wiry guy with bloodshot eyes. Yeah, he slurred. Hi, Chloe started, trying her best to sound friendly. I'm so sorry to bother you, but I live right upstairs, and the music is just a little loud. I've got to be up early for work. The man just stared at her for a second, and then a slow, nasty grin spread across his face. Right, the girl in 3B. I've seen you. He leaned against the doorframe. It's a little loud. That's kind of the point. Okay. Well, could you maybe just turn it down a bit? It's almost 2 in the morning. He let out a short, sharp laugh. I'll see what I can do. Then he slammed the door right in her face. For a moment, there was silence. Chloe let out a sigh of relief and headed back upstairs. But the second her own apartment door clicked shut, the bass came roaring back, even louder than before. This became her new reality. It wasn't every night, but it was often enough to wear her down. Sometimes it was music, other times it was the sound of violent arguments, things being thrown, and angry shouting that made her skin crawl, and just like so many disputes between neighbors. It all started with a simple noise complaint. Chloe began documenting everything: dates, times, what kind of disturbance it was. She sent polite emails to her building's management, which gradually became more and more desperate. The response was always the same copy-pasted promise to look into the matter. One Saturday afternoon, she was leaving her apartment just as the man from 2B was coming up the stairs. He stopped on the step right below her, completely blocking her path. "You're the one who keeps complaining, aren't you?" he said. His voice was low and menacing, nothing like his drunken shouting. "I've just asked for the noise to be kept down at night," she said, her hand instinctively tightening on her keys. "You think you're better than me moving in here, thinking you can tell people how to live." He took another step up, forcing her to step back. "You need to stop. Mind your own business. It becomes my business when I can't sleep in my own home," she shot back, her voice trembling a little. He smiled that same ugly grin from the first night. "You keep sending those emails, and you're going to find out what a real problem sounds like." He then shoved past her, bumping her shoulder hard on purpose, and disappeared up the stairs. Chloe just stood there, her heart pounding. That wasn't an argument. It was a threat. A line had been crossed. The small annoyance had turned into active harassment. She immediately went back inside and called the management company, her voice shaking as she told them what happened. The person on the other end of the line sounded completely bored, but promised to make a note of it. That night, the noise was worse than ever, but it wasn't music anymore. It was a deliberate, targeted banging on his ceiling, her floor. Thump, thump, thump. It was erratic, like he was listening for her, banging right under where she was walking. She went to the bedroom. The thumping followed. She went to the kitchen. It was there, too. It felt like psychological torture. She put in earplugs, but she could still feel the vibrations through the frame of her bed. The next morning, she found a note slid under her door. In crude block letters, it read, "I can hear you." That's when the real fear kicked in. This wasn't a noise dispute anymore. It was personal. It felt like she was being hunted in her own home. She called the police, but they told her that without a more direct threat, it was a civil matter for the landlord to handle. It felt like no one would or could help her. Often, management will tell tenants to file a police report to create a paper trail. But doing that can just make the person you're reporting even angrier. The banging continued for 2 more nights. Chloe was barely sleeping, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building. She was living in a state of constant, gnawing anxiety. On the 3rd day, she came home from work and saw her apartment door was slightly ajar. She always double-locked it. Her blood ran cold. She backed away slowly and called 911 from the hallway. The police came and cleared the apartment. Nothing was stolen. Nothing seemed out of place. But someone had been inside, and on her kitchen counter, they found another note in the same block letters. "I told you to stop." That was it. She was done. The police documented the break-in, and with that report, Chloe was finally able to break her lease. She packed her things in a frantic haze, constantly looking over her shoulder. A friend came to help, and as they carried the very last box out, the man from 2B opened his door. He just stood there, watching them. He didn't say a word. He just smiled. Chloe never looked back and never found out what happened to him. Her dream apartment, her sanctuary, had become a house of horrors. It was a terrifying lesson that the thin floor separating her from her neighbor was no barrier at all to a campaign of terror that all started with a simple music complaint. Section 2, The Watcher. For Michael, apartment 4A was just a practical move. It was close to his new job. The rent wasn't crazy, and the building seemed quiet. His next-door neighbor in 4B, an older guy he only knew as Mr. Henderson, seemed to prove that point. He was quiet, kept to himself, and their entire relationship consisted of brief nods in the hallway. He seemed harmless, maybe just a little odd. The oddness started small. Michael worked long hours and often got home late. He started to notice that whenever he got off the elevator, Mr. Henderson's door, which had been open just a crack, would click shut. A coincidence, he figured. Then he started seeing Mr. Henderson everywhere. If Michael left for work at 7:30 a.m., Mr. Henderson was at the bus stop on the corner. If Michael went for a run on Saturday, there was Mr. Henderson walking his nervous little dog in the exact same park. It's a big city, but it was starting to feel unnervingly small. The encounters got more direct. One evening, Michael was fumbling with his keys when Mr. Henderson came out of his apartment. "Working late again, Michael?" he asked. His voice was soft, but carried a weird intensity. Yeah, busy week," Michael managed, finally getting his door unlocked. "You left at 7:32 this morning," Mr. Henderson said, his eyes locked on Michael. "Came back at 8:47 p.m. That's a long day." Michael froze. That was bizarrely specific. "You keeping track?" he asked, trying to laugh it off. Mr. Henderson didn't laugh. "I just notice things. I notice you get Thai food on Wednesdays. I notice you have a friend, the one with red hair, who visits on weekends. I notice you forgot to lock your car last night." Every word was like a tiny pinprick. This wasn't just noticing things. This was surveillance. Michael felt a deep, creeping sense of violation. He mumbled something about being tired and quickly backed into his apartment, throwing the deadbolt and sliding the chain lock. He crept to his window and peeked through the blinds. Down on the street below, Mr. Henderson was standing on the corner, looking right up at his window. The feeling of being constantly watched was suffocating. Michael started changing up his whole life, leaving at different times, taking new routes to work, but it was useless. Mr. Henderson somehow anticipated his every move. He'd suddenly appear in the same grocery store aisle or be sitting on a bench along Michael's new jogging path. This is the unique terror of being stalked by a neighbor. Your home, the one place you're supposed to feel safe, becomes the epicenter of your fear. The psychological toll was huge. Michael became paranoid, jumping at shadows. Was that Mr. Henderson across the street? Was that his car parked a block away? He felt like a prisoner in his own life. The breaking point came on a Monday morning. Michael walked to his car and found a small, crisp white envelope tucked under the windshield wiper. Inside was a single photograph. It was a grainy, long-distance shot of him inside his own apartment, sitting on his couch, watching TV. In the corner of the photo was a date and timestamp from Saturday night. His blood turned to ice. There was only one place the photo could have been taken, from the apartment building across the street. But how dizzy with rage and fear, he marched back into his building and straight to the manager's office. He slammed the photo on the desk. "This is from my neighbor, Mr. Henderson in 4B. He's following me, and now he's taking pictures of me in my own home." The manager, a weary-looking guy named Frank, just sighed. "Look, Mr. Henderson is a bit eccentric. We've had odd comments before, but are you sure it was him? Who else could it be? He told me he knows my schedule. This is insane." Frank promised to talk to him, but Michael knew it wasn't enough. He went to the police. They were sympathetic, but explained that without a direct threat of violence, getting a restraining order is tough. They took a report and told him to document everything. That evening, there was a knock on his door. It was loud and forceful. Michael looked through the peephole. It was Mr. Henderson, his face twisted in rage. "I know you talked to the manager." "Michael," he screamed through the door. "You think you can get rid of me? I'm not going anywhere. I'm always watching." He started pounding the door with his fists. "You belong to me. This is my building. You're just a guest in my life." Terrified, Michael called 911. While he was on the phone, he heard a strange scraping sound from his living room window. He crept over and saw that Mr. Henderson was no longer at his door. He was on the fire escape, his face pressed against the glass, eyes wide and manic, trying to pry the window open. The police arrived just as Mr. Henderson shattered the glass. The sight of the uniforms seemed to snap him out of it. He was arrested, shouting that Michael had ruined everything. The full story came out later. Mr. Henderson had a history of stalking, with complaints filed against him at other buildings. He owned a powerful telescope, which he used to watch the entire neighborhood, but his obsession had zeroed in on Michael. The apartment manager confessed they knew about minor issues, but hadn't grasped how dangerous he was. Mr. Henderson was charged with stalking and breaking and entering. A restraining order was finally granted, but the damage was done. Michael's sense of safety was gone. He moved out a month later, unable to shake the feeling of being watched, unable to sit on his own couch without seeing that photograph in his mind. He learned that sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones living quiet, unassuming lives right next door. Section 3, the empty apartment. When the noisy family across the hall in 5J finally moved out, Sarah was relieved. The hallway had basically been their kids' personal playground. For a few glorious weeks, the apartment was empty, and the silence was bliss. The first sign something was off was a faint smell. It was a weird, chemical odor, like paint thinner or some kind of industrial cleaner, and it seemed to seep from under the door of 5J. She mentioned it to the super, who checked the empty apartment, but said he couldn't find anything, and figured it was just the leftover cleaning fumes. But the smell kept coming back, sometimes strong, sometimes barely there. Then came the noises, faint scuffling sounds, like something being dragged, a soft thud in the middle of the night. It was unsettling. That apartment was supposed to be vacant. She tried to convince herself it was just the building settling or sounds traveling from other floors. A week later, 3 of her packages were stolen from right in front of her door over 2 days. Package theft happened, but this felt personal. It felt targeted. She reported it, and management sent out the usual generic email about picking up deliveries promptly. Sarah started being more careful. One evening, while cooking dinner, she heard a distinct metallic scraping right outside her door. It sounded exactly like a key fumbling in a lock. She froze, listening, her heart hammering. She tiptoed to her door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but the door to 5J, the empty apartment, was slowly, silently closing, as if someone had just slipped inside. She was sure of it now. Someone was using that apartment, and she had a sick feeling it was connected to the noises, the smell, and her missing packages. But who and how did they get a key? Deciding another call to management would be useless, Sarah called the police non-emergency line. She explained everything. An officer came by, but without any sign of forced entry, there wasn't much they could do. As the officer noted, it's incredibly difficult to prove unlawful entry without hard evidence like security footage. He took a report and told her to call back if she saw anything more direct. The whole thing left her completely on edge. Every creak in the hall made her jump. She stopped ordering packages to her apartment and started triple-checking her deadbolt at night. The breaking point came a few days later. She left work early with a splitting headache, getting home in the middle of the afternoon. As she got off the elevator, she saw him. A man she sort of recognized from a lower floor was standing right in front of 5J with a key in his hand. He hadn't seen her. He unlocked the door, slipped inside, and pulled it shut behind him. He was carrying a large empty duffel bag. Sarah didn't even think. She ducked back into the stairwell, pulled out her phone, and whispered to the 911 dispatcher what was happening. They told her to stay on the line and that officers were on their way. Hiding in the stairwell, she waited. It felt like an eternity. Then, she heard the door to 5J open again. Peeking around the corner, she saw the man coming out. The duffel bag was now bulging. He locked the door and turned for the elevator. And that's when she saw it. Sticking out of the bag's side pocket was the bright yellow packaging of a book she'd ordered weeks ago, one of the first things that had gone missing. Just then, 2 police officers came out of the other stairwell. "Police, stop right there," one of them yelled. The man froze like a deer in headlights, dropped the bag, and ran for it, but the officers tackled him in seconds. The story that unraveled was both bizarre and infuriating. The man was the cousin of a part-time maintenance worker. He had copied the master key for the 5th floor and had been using the empty apartment as his own personal warehouse for stolen packages. He'd watch for deliveries, slip out of 5J, grab them, and hoard them inside until he could haul them away to sell. The chemical smell, cleaning supplies he was using to wipe fingerprints off the stolen goods. Police found hundreds of dollars worth of stolen items inside 5J, including everything that had been taken from Sarah. The man and his maintenance worker cousin were both arrested. The building had to change all the locks on the floor and put a stricter key policy in place. Sarah felt vindicated, but also deeply uneasy. For weeks, a thief had been living a secret life just a few feet away, using the anonymity of apartment life as his cover. The silence she had loved from the empty apartment had been a lie, hiding a threat that was closer than she could have ever imagined. These stories are a chilling reminder of how fast a living situation can go south. It's wild to think about how little we really know about the people just a few feet away. Have you ever had a neighbor who just felt off? Let us know in the comments, but please be careful and don't share any identifying details. Your story might be a warning sign someone else needs to see. And if you're finding these accounts as creepy as we do, maybe hit that subscribe button for more true nightmare fuel. Now, back to the stories. Section 4, The Thin Walls. The Willows apartment complex was sold as a secure, family-friendly community, complete with a new electronic gate and what the leasing agent called rigorous tenant screening. For Anna and her 6-year-old daughter, Maya, it seemed perfect. After a rough divorce, all Anna wanted was a place where they could both feel safe. Their downstairs neighbor was a man in his late 30s named David. He seemed normal enough at first glance, but soon, Anna started noticing things. The walls were paper thin, and she could often hear him talking to himself and not just mumbling. It was angry, violent muttering. He would curse and scream at people who weren't there, sometimes for hours. Then came the sounds of violence, not aimed at anyone, it seemed, but at his own apartment. She'd hear him punching the walls, a dull, sickening thud that would make her and Maya jump. One evening, a huge bang was followed by the sound of shattering glass. The next day, she noticed his window was boarded up from the inside. Deeply concerned, Anna went to the building manager. She explained what she was hearing, how scared she was for her and her daughter. The manager was completely dismissive. "He's a little strange, but he pays his rent on time," she said. "As long as he isn't bothering you directly, there's not much I can do." And that is a response that is, unfortunately, all too common. Landlords often downplay potential dangers to avoid getting involved. Anna insisted that punching walls and rage-filled screaming were a bit more than a noise issue. The manager reluctantly agreed to have a chat with David. Whatever she said, it only made things 100 times worse. The very next night, the screaming was directed at her. "I know you're up there listening, you witch," he roared, his voice terrifyingly clear through the floor. "You want to get me kicked out? I'll show you trouble." This was followed by a series of violent thuds against his ceiling, her floor. Maya woke up terrified. Anna just held her, trembling herself, feeling totally helpless. She started calling the police during these episodes, but every single time, David would be completely silent by the time they arrived. With nothing to see or hear, they'd classify it as a simple neighbor dispute and leave. It was a nightmare loop. His behavior would escalate. She'd call for help, and by the time help got there, the problem would have vanished, making her look like she was hysterical. Anna went back to the management office again and again, documenting every single incident in writing. She gave them dates, times, and detailed descriptions of his threats. She begged them to take it seriously and reminded them of the rigorous tenant screening they'd promised. The manager finally admitted David had a prior record for minor disturbances, but claimed he seemed fine when he applied. What the manager wasn't saying is that landlords have a legal duty to provide a safe environment. Ignoring repeated, documented complaints about a dangerous tenant is a massive failure on their part. Anna was trapped in a situation where her landlord's refusal to act was putting her and her child directly in harm's way. One afternoon, Anna and Maya were coming home from school. As they walked down the hall, David's door flew open. He stood there, blocking their path. His eyes were wild, and his face was slick with sweat. He was holding a hammer. "You and your little brat," he hissed, his eyes darting between Anna and Maya. "You just couldn't leave it alone, could you?" Anna's blood ran cold. She shoved Maya behind her. "David, just let us pass," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Pass? There's no passing," he said, taking a step closer and raising the hammer. "I'm going to make the noise stop, for good." Suddenly, another door down the hall opened. It was an elderly man who'd heard the shouting. "Hey, what's going on out here? Leave them alone," he yelled. David's head snapped toward the new voice, distracted for just 1 second. It was the only chance Anna needed. She grabbed Maya's hand and ran. They sprinted down the hall, flew down the stairs, and didn't stop until they were locked in her car. Speeding away, the police were called, and this time, with a witness and a weapon, they took it seriously. A standoff with David lasted for hours before he was finally arrested. A search of his apartment revealed other weapons and holes punched clean through the drywall. The aftermath was a legal disaster for the apartment building. Anna, along with the neighbor who intervened, sued the management company for negligence. They had a mountain of evidence: Anna's dozens of written complaints, her phone records from the police calls, and the manager's admission of knowing about David's past. The case exposed the company's complete failure to address a foreseeable threat. Anna and Maya never went back to the Willows, The trauma of that day, of that man with the hammer, stuck with them for a long time. They had trusted a promise of security, a promise broken by indifference, and the terrifying reality that sometimes the thinnest walls are all that stand between a family and a violent, unhinged nightmare. Section 5, The Good Samaritan. After a nasty flu left her weak and drained, Clara was incredibly grateful for her neighbor Susan, a friendly, middle-aged woman from across the hall. Susan had knocked on her door after not seeing her for a few days, offering to pick up groceries or medicine for Clara, who lived alone with no family nearby. It was a touching gesture. "It's no trouble at all, dear," Susan had said with a warm smile. "We neighbors have to look out for each other." For the next week, Susan was an angel. She brought Clara soup, grabbed her prescriptions, and even brought in her mail. Clara was so sick, she gave her a spare key just in case of an emergency. It felt like the sensible thing to do, a lifeline when she was so vulnerable. As Clara got better, she thanked Susan up and down and got her spare key back. But Susan's helpfulness didn't stop. She'd knock on the door with fresh-baked cookies or to share some building gossip. At first, it just seemed neighborly. But soon, it started to feel intrusive. Susan seemed to know things she had no way of knowing. She'd comment on phone calls Clara had just ended. "That sounded like a long chat with your sister," she'd say, even though Clara had been speaking quietly with the windows shut. She asked about a new lamp Clara had ordered online, a package she had brought inside the second it was delivered. "That box looked heavy. Hope you like it," Susan commented in the hallway. A creepy feeling started to crawl over Clara. How did she know that the lamp comment was especially weird? The only way Susan could know the box was heavy is if she had picked it up. But why would she be touching her mail? Clara started trying to create some distance, making excuses about being busy. But that just seemed to make Susan knock more often. Then, Clara started noticing tiny things out of place in her apartment. A book on her nightstand shifted an inch. The TV remote on a different couch cushion. They were small, almost unnoticeable changes, the kind of things that make you question your own mind. She checked her door for any signs of a break-in, but found nothing. She thought about the spare key. She had gotten it back. Right. She racked her brain, trying to remember the exact moment. She remembered Susan handing it to her, remembered putting it on the kitchen counter. It all seemed so normal. The final, terrifying piece of the puzzle clicked into place one night. As Clara was getting ready for bed, she heard a faint scratching sound at her front door. It wasn't a knock. It was the distinct sound of metal on metal. She crept to the peephole and saw Susan, her back to the door, working on the lock with a set of slender metal tools. A lock-picking kit. A wave of nausea hit her. Susan wasn't a good Samaritan. She was an intruder. The kindness, the soup, the spare key, it was all a scam to get close. She must have copied the key before giving it back. And now that the copied key wasn't working, maybe Clara had thrown the deadbolt from the inside. She was just picking the lock. Clara backed away, her mind racing. She grabbed her phone, quietly, locked herself in the bathroom, and dialed 911. In a panicked whisper, she explained that her neighbor was breaking into her apartment.
Section 5.
While she was on the
The
phone,
Good Samaritan,
she
after
heard
a
the
nasty
sickening
flu,
click of the lock
left her
giving way,
weak and
followed
drained.
by the soft creak
Clara
of her
was
front door
incredibly
opening.
grateful for her
She held her
neighbor,
breath,
Susan,
listening
a
to the soft
friendly,
footsteps moving
middle-aged
through her
woman from
home.
across the hall.
The dispatcher was
Susan
calm,
had knocked
telling
on
her
her door
officers were
after not
seconds
seeing
away.
her for a few
Those
days,
seconds felt
offering
like
to
an
pick up
hour.
groceries or
What did Susan
medicine.
want?
For
Was she a
Clara,
thief,
who lived
or was it
alone
something
with
worse?
no family
The
nearby,
thought of this
it
woman,
was a
who
touching
had smiled
gesture.
so warmly
"It's
and
no
brought her
trouble
soup,
at all, dear,"
creeping through her
Susan
apartment in
had
the
said
dark,
with a
was a
warm
violation
smile.
deeper than any simple
"We
theft.
neighbors have to
Then
look
she
out
heard
for
it.
each other. For the
Police,
next
don't
week,
move.
Susan was an angel.
There was a startled
She
cry from
brought
Susan,
Clara soup,
the sound of a
grabbed her
brief scuffle,
prescriptions, and
and
even
then
brought in
just the
her
officers'
mail.
voices.
Clara was
When the
so
police let
sick,
Clara
she
out of the
gave her a
bathroom, the
spare
scene was
key
surreal.
just in case of an
Susan was in
emergency.
handcuffs,
It
her
felt
friendly
like the
face a
sensible
pale
thing to
mask of
do,
shock.
a lifeline, when
On the
she was
floor,
so
near her,
vulnerable.
was a bag.
As
Inside was the
Clara
lockpicking
got
set,
better,
a
she
camera,
thanked Susan
and
up
several
and
tiny
down
listening
and got her
devices.
spare key back.
The
But
investigation
Susan's
revealed the horrifying
helpfulness
truth.
didn't stop.
Susan
She'd
was a
knock on the door
kleptomaniac
with fresh
and a
baked
stalker.
cookies or to share
She
some
got a
building
thrill from
gossip.
invading her neighbors'
At
lives,
first,
not
it just
just by
seemed
stealing their things,
neighborly.
but by
But
stealing their
soon,
privacy.
it started to
She
feel
preyed on their vulnerability,
intrusive.
like Clara's
Susan
illness,
seemed to know
to gain
things
trust and
she had
access.
no way of knowing.
She would plant bugs,
She'd
learn their
comment on phone
schedules,
calls
and enter
Clara
their
had just
apartments
ended.
when they were gone. Not
That
always to
sounded
take
like a
things,
long
but
chat
just
with
to be
your
there,
sister.
to
She'd
look through
say,
their belongings,
even though Clara
to
had
insert
been
herself
speaking
into their
quietly
lives.
with the windows
Moving small
shut.
items was a
She
sick game
asked
for her,
about a new
a way
lamp
to feel
Clara
in
had
control.
ordered online,
Police
a
found a
package
hoard of
she
stolen
had brought
property in her
inside
apartment,
the second
belonging
it was
to various
delivered.
friends she had made
That
over the
box
years.
looked heavy.
She was a predator,
"Hope you like
hiding in
it,"
plain sight,
Susan commented
using neighborly
in the
kindness
hallway.
as her
A
camouflage.
creepy
For
feeling
Clara,
started to crawl
the betrayal
over
was the worst
Clara.
part.
How did
She
she
had
know
trusted
that?
Susan,
The lamp
and that
comment
trust
was
was
especially
twisted
weird.
and used as a weapon against
The
her.
only way Susan could
She
know
moved
the
out,
box was
unable
heavy
to ever feel
is
safe
if she
in that
had
apartment
picked it
again.
up. But
Her
why would she
experience
be
was a
touching her
terrifying
mail?
reminder that evil
Clara
doesn't always
started
have
trying
a
to
scary
create some
face.
distance,
Sometimes
making excuses
it shows
about
up with a
being
warm
busy.
smile
But
and a
that
bowl of
just
soup,
seemed to make
proving that the
Susan
most
knock
dangerous
more
neighbor
often.
isn't always the strange
Then
one,
Clara
but the
started
one who
noticing
seems
tiny
a little
things
too good
out
to be
of
true.
place in her
The 5
apartment.
stories
A
you've just
book on
heard
her
are
nightstand
extreme,
shifted an inch.
but they
The
all
TV
started with something
remote on a
small
different
and
couch
ordinary.
cushion.
A noise
They
complaint,
were small,
an odd
almost
neighbor, a missing
unnoticeable.
package.
Changes the kind of things
They
that
show
make you
just how
question your
vulnerable
own
we are
mind.
in the one
She
place
checked
we're
her
supposed
door
to
for
feel
any
completely
signs of a
safe.
break-in,
Living
but
so
found
close to
nothing.
strangers means
She
you have to
thought
have a
about
certain
the
amount of
spare
trust.
key.
But
She
these
had gotten
stories
it back.
are a serious
Right
warning.
say racked her brain, trying
Always
to
document
remember the exact
strange or threatening
moment.
behavior.
She
Report it
remembered
to both
Susan
management
handing it
and the
to her,
police to create
remembered
a paper
putting
trail.
it on the kitchen
It
counter.
could be critical
It
for your
all
safety down the
seemed
line.
so normal. But
And most
the
importantly,
final,
trust your gut.
terrifying piece of the
If
puzzle
a situation
clicked
feels
into
wrong,
place
it
one
probably
night.
is.
As
Things
Clara
like
was getting
security
ready for
cameras
bed,
and
she
better locks
heard a
aren't
faint
paranoid.
scratching
They're
sound
practical.
at her front door.
Thanks for joining us
It
for these
wasn't a knock.
terrifying,
It
true
was the
encounters.
distinct sound of
If
metal
these
on
stories
metal.
made you
She
think
crept to
twice
the
about
peephole
who's
and
on the
saw
other side of your
Susan,
wall,
her back to
hit the
the
like
door,
button
working
and
on the
subscribe
lock
for more
with a set
unsettling,
of
true
slender
stories.
metal tools.
Stay
A
aware,
lock-picking kit.
stay safe,
A wave of nausea
and
hit
don't
her.
forget that sometimes
Susan
the
wasn't
worst
a good
nightmares
Samaritan.
are the ones living right
She
next
was
door.
an intruder.